Alrighty, alrighty. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, and it's good to see everyone who's here. Good to see everyone who's here. We are live. I know that this is a bit of a, how shall I say, busy time of year. We have a lot of people doing things. So, I understand that. I may not have as many people present tonight, so that's understandable. So, I just want to say welcome to anyone who is new here. Welcome to anyone who's here. Welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time. Good to see you. I am the King's Bard. You can find me on YouTube and on Facebook. It's good to see you. So like the video, subscribe if you're on YouTube, and like the page if you're on Facebook. Hit that notification bell. Get all that stuff out there. So yeah, really good to see everyone here. I hope that we will be able to get some more people here in the future. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. Yeah, I'll open up with a word of prayer, and we will get right on into it. So let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your grace, for your mercy, for your love, your kindness, and for everything that you have done for us. Lord Jesus, I just ask right now that you would please be with us. Please speak, Lord, that you would give us clarity and knowledge into how to deal with these things. And I ask above all other things, Lord, that you would glorify Jesus in all of this, and that you would lift him up. Thank you so much. In Jesus' name I pray and ask these things. Amen. Alrighty. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Once again, it is great to see you all here. If you have any questions at any point, please feel free to leave them in the chat. I will see them at some point. I'm going to put my chat up so you guys can see it. So if someone leaves a question, that kind of a thing, we'll do that. So anyway, let's dive right on in. Let's not let there be any more delay. We're looking at fads versus facts this week. Now, I do want to say, of course, the usual disclaimer: the information in this presentation is for educational purposes only. It's not intended for the diagnosis, treatment, prevention, or cure of any disease. If you want to make any changes to your lifestyle, implement any remedies, any regimen of any sort, please consult with a qualified physician first before you do that. So please do that. So, a health fad. What is that? A health fad, this is something that, we see people refer to from time to time. It's something that, how can I say this? It is interesting. It's not a bad thing. Or well, I shouldn't say it. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It also isn't necessarily a good thing, right? So there's a fad is essentially a style, activity, or interest, according to the Cambridge English Dictionary, a style, activity, or interest that is very popular for a short period of time. So it has popularity quite quickly, but it doesn't last very long. And it actually will gain popularity relatively quickly. It becomes fashionable to do, fashionable to use. People will say, "Oh, I do this, I do that," and then the popularity dies out just about as quickly as it became popular. So there's not a whole lot when it comes to a fad. They often don't have very long lifespans. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that there are not people who adhere to these fads for long periods of time. You do. There are plenty of people who are still holding on to health fads from the 1970s. That doesn't mean those fads are fads anymore. Those fads are long gone, but there are still some people who hold on to them. We'll talk about a few fads that are still relatively, how shall I say it? There are a few fads that are still relatively well known, but at the same time, they're not you still know about them, right? They're still active, but at the same time, they're not particularly popular anymore. In general, they're not popular. They may have been popular at some point, and they may still have some adherents, but they're not inherently, but they're not popular anymore. So let's look at some examples of a health fad. Speaking of a diet from the 70s, or from 70s, 80s, that era. You have the grapefruit diet. The grapefruit diet was a fad that took place quite a while back, and the idea was you eat a grapefruit either with every meal, or in some cases, some people ate exclusively grapefruit. And the idea was that grapefruit would help you lose weight. Now, technically, this is true. There is. How shall I say it? When it comes to, especially if you're eating nothing but grapefruit, you will lose weight. That's just the way things work. Grapefruit are not particularly high in calories, so there's, yeah, you'll lose weight. But at the same time, you're also not going to be healthy. You're going to become nutrient deficient and malnourished, and it's just, yeah. So, but it was a fad that took place quite a while ago. In fact, it was one of the first modern fads, and one of the first fad diets that have come out and been called a fad diet. Another big one that still has a lot of adherents today, either in name or in principle, is the Atkins Diet. We'll talk a bit more about this one. The Atkins Diet is a low-carbohydrate, high-protein diet that supposedly, that makes the claim that carbohydrates are the source of all evils in the dietary world, pretty much. The idea is that the less carbs you eat, the more weight you'll lose. And the more carbs you eat, the more weight you gain. Of course, this is not founded in any scientific principle at all. So that's one example. Again, we'll be looking at the Atkins diet in a little bit more detail. Another popular fad, several years back, I think 6 or 7 years ago it was. Now it was really big. Was the Alkaline Diet. The Alkaline Diet was a big fad. We'll talk a bit more about it. But basically, the principle is you need to eat foods according to the principles of this diet. You need to eat foods that are alkalizing, that turn your body into that put your body in an alkaline pH, which is a pH of higher than 7. We'll talk a bit more about that. Juice fasting, of course, became popular about 10 years ago or so with the release of the movie Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, where a man, I forget his name, so forgive me, I forget his name, but he went on this big, long journey of fasting for a long time, doing nothing but drinking juices, and more specifically, vegetable juices, fresh juices. Juice fasting is not inherently bad. So a fad is not necessarily something that is bad or wrong. Usually a fad is something that just becomes popular and goes away. That's simply by definition. Oftentimes a fad will take things a little bit to further extremes than they need to be, and that was the case with juice fasting. Now there are exceptions. Once again, juice fasting for that individual was probably, well, almost certainly the right thing to do because he was malnourished, he was overweight, and he had a lot of health problems. And the way that really helped him was getting all that nutrition and phytochemicals and everything else right directly into his bloodstream and into his cells through juice fasting. That was appropriate for him. And there are people who maybe a 6-month or a 9-month or a year-long juice fast is not necessarily the wisest choice, but juice fasting is not inherently wrong or bad. As a matter of fact, I would recommend it in a number of cases. So it's not bad or wrong, it just was a fad that occurred about 10 years ago or so, and stuck in place for several years and resulted in the popularity of, for example, Jamba Juice is a great example. They really boomed as a result of that. Metabolic therapies are an example of a different sort of fad. Instead of a fad diet or a fad thing like the juice fasting, the metabolic therapies, so-called, are they're basically supposed to be cancer treatment or any other kind, some other kind of disease treatment based on a particular kind of diet. There are different sorts of these. There's the Gerson diet, and there's some other things too. But metabolic therapies are a broad spectrum of things. These are usually quite restrictive. They're usually quite harmful. They usually result, they usually result in the restriction of vital nutrition or vital nutrients, while at the same time advocating for lots of other vital nutrients, and basically creating an imbalance of nutrition. Oftentimes they also come accompanied with a coffee enema, and this is also something that's very dangerous. Coffee enemas, well, coffee itself is a diuretic, and then on top of that it's got caffeine, which is an addictive drug, and yes, I refer to it as a drug, that's what it is. And on top of that, it's got tannins, which and other chemicals which inhibit the absorption of all sorts of different nutrients. And when you use it as an enema, it just creates all sorts of problems. So once again, coffee enemas, metabolic therapies, and such. That's an example of a different sort of fad. Instead of a fad diet, you have something more along the lines of a fad treatment, that sort of a thing. It was very popular for a little while, and it kind of fades in and out, but generally it's out of favor now because people have begun to realize, or people have realized since then, oh, this is not something that really is super beneficial. Now, a more controversial thing that I'm calling a fad, that I refer to as a fad, is the current cannabis fad. With the legalization of cannabis, of marijuana, and in various forms and sundry applications, cannabis has, with that legalization, there's been a huge boom of the cannabis industry. And we'll talk a bit more about cannabis, but it is a fad right now, with all the people claiming that cannabis, CBD, THC, all those different things, oh, it does this and it does that, it does this, especially CBD is very popular at the moment. And they are advocating it for this and for that and for that and for this and so on and so on and so on. And just the list of supposed benefits just is quite endless. And so, it's very popular. You see it in everything from little tinctures to oil to, I've even seen it in sodas. So, it's a fad. When you start seeing it, stuff like that, that's a fad. When you start seeing it put in soda, that's a fad. That's just, yeah. And of course, any number of supplement regimen. I've been to a number of what you might call pyramid schemes, or that sort of a thing where, you sell, you're under me, you sell stuff and I sell stuff, and I'm your supplier, but I'm also being supplied by the company, and that sort of a thing. A lot of those supplement companies, in fact, pretty much all of them, are merely fads. There are a lot of them. And I've been to, like I said, I've been to several of them, and I've been upfront with them. I've said, I'm a really hard sell. Yeah, it's very difficult. Only one of them impressed me, and that was one of them that instead of just pills, they actually had basically a smoothie in a pouch, which is way better than anything else. They impressed me. I still didn't buy into it, but they impressed me because most supplement regimen and so on, uh, and other types of things where you have shakes and mixes and all sorts of things like that, those are fads. They're not necessarily harmful, although they can be, but they're usually not that helpful either. And most of the benefits that you get as a result of following those regimen are benefits that are either minimal or placebo, or they could come from lifestyle, and they're not even as good as the lifestyle that you could get anyway. I remember one particular pitch that I went to where the guy was saying, "Oh yeah, I used to sleep 8 hours a night, and I just would never feel rested in the morning." Just talking about how terrible his sleep was, and then he said, "Oh, but then I started taking this supplement of this company now that I'm selling for, and I'm trying to get you guys involved in. I'm doing this and doing that, and I'm selling this, and I started taking it." And now I sleep so much better. And then later on, it came out that he wasn't going to sleep until 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, there's your problem. If he would go to bed at 9:30 or 10 o'clock, he could get up early in the morning, do all the stuff he was doing from that time between 9:30 and 1 in the early morning hours, and on top of that, he would be saving $50 a month on the supplement. So, you know, yeah, usually these things, their benefits could really be vastly improved upon, even, or at least equaled by the simple use of lifestyle. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's some characteristics of health fads. Usually, or often anyway, a fad will require a vast change with a strict adherence to some sort of protocol. This is not always a bad thing. Many of the regimen that I have recommended require a vast change with a strict adherence to a protocol. So this is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, because there are many circumstances which vast change is necessary, especially if you have an unhealthy lifestyle. Then you do need a vast change, and you do need to adhere as strictly as you can, but there is grace involved with this. And, there is not a, oh, you can't have this food, you can't have this, that, unless you have a specific medical reason why you should not be eating this. Like, for example, if you can't eat, if you have celiac disease, you should not be eating any kind of wheat, barley, or rye. That's just, you shouldn't. But someone like me who doesn't have that, unless there's some other, personal reason, like, oh, well, I just, a family member isn't going to be doing it or something like that. There's no health reason why I should be doing that unless I'm beginning to manifest signs of sensitivity to it or some such thing. Then I go and I get diagnosed. So, usually though, such a strict protocol is the realm of fads and not of a real health change. But again, a vast change is not always a bad thing. As a matter of fact, a great many people could benefit from a vast change. So this is not necessarily something that's bad, or that's not good. However, in addition to this, health fads usually bring things to extremes. For example, they will restrict the diet unnecessarily, or they will put things on for a length of time that's not really a wise thing or a proper thing. For example, the grapefruit diet is an unnecessary restriction. If you're eating nothing but grapefruit, well, you're going to get malnourished. That's an unnecessary restriction. On the other hand, juice fasting, or at least the popular juice fasting that was for months and months and months, that's really an improper length of time for most people. Most people do not need to go for months and months without eating solid food. It's just not a good thing, and regular juice fasts are not appropriate either. It's just not a good idea. You don't need that. You don't need to have those fasts if you're a healthy individual, if you have, if you're living a healthy lifestyle and, you have overall a decent environment. You don't really need a juice fast. Maybe you might need a cleanse from time to time, but not a fast. Not really. Not unless there's some specific medical reason for that. But again, a juice fast is not necessarily bad. It's just the length of time usually, or improper timing, or doing it when it's unnecessary. Often, however, fads are also expensive to maintain or to acquire. This is especially true of the supplement companies. As I mentioned before, that one pitch that I went to, now, most pitches that I go to, actually, the products that they're trying to sell you are quite expensive. I've seen them as, a couple $100 a pop. For a decent thing. And, their ingredients and things like that aren't necessarily bad. They're just expensive. Or sometimes it's not so much the product itself that's expensive as the maintenance of the fad itself is expensive to maintain. For example, the Atkins Diet. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but, it advocates eating lots of high-protein foods, and those are some of the most expensive foods that you can get. And so having that's expensive to maintain. Something I've noticed about people who follow fads and about fads in general, fads will often, in fact, usually dismiss contradictory scientific evidence by dismissing modern science itself. This is a huge problem, and you see it. One of the biggest fads that we're seeing really rise up right now is the fad of anti-vax. It is a health fad. It is not a fact, and I cannot stress that enough. It's not really the scope of my thing, but right now, but the anti-vax thing that's going around right now that you see in a lot of places, that is a fad. That is a fad. It's popular. It rises and falls in popularity. Right now, it's popular because of COVID and those situations, right? But fads are, it's a fad. It's gained in popularity, and goes through this cycle of being popular and unpopular, popular and unpopular. It's a fad. It rides the waves. It's not a fact. It's, a fact may or may not be popular, but a fact is consistent, and unfortunately, the anti-vax is not. And this is not just anti-vax. I've seen this in other places as well, with, for example, the Atkins Diet and the Alkaline Diet. When scientific evidence that contradicts their claims is put forward, they dismiss modern science entirely. They dismiss the evidence by saying that, oh, well, it's just a biased study, it's just this, it's just that. And it's really a self-fulfilling prophecy, kind of a thing. It's or that's not the right word, or phrase, I should say. But it's essentially cognitive bias. They're just saying, if it doesn't agree with me, it's not true, which is not honest. It's actually extreme dishonesty, intellectual dishonesty. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's intentional, but it's important to notice that if there is something out there that is claiming to be true, and then any scientific evidence to the contrary is dismissed as being just, oh, well, it's a biased study, be careful of that. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong still, because biased studies do exist. That's not something that can be explained away. There are biased studies out there, and that does happen. But the preponderance of evidence will end up on the side of what's true, not what's not true. It's just, there's no way that can happen. Yeah, that's just the way it works. Often, a health fad will show a lack of knowledge of basic anatomy and physiology. To use the example of supplements again, and this is not necessarily a fad, but I love herbs. I advocate herbs, and I don't want people to get the idea that I am not for herbs and natural treatments and things like that. I'm for that. Okay, I want to be very clear. I'm not against those things. I'm not against those things. As a matter of fact, I advocate for them. But I do not advocate for heavily processed supplements, for expensive things, and I'll get into more about why in a little bit. But so please bear with me on this. And again, if you have any questions at any point, please, please, please put it in the chat. I am looking. It's right over here for me. I will see it. So please, if you have any questions or comments at any point, please write them in this. I remember a story that a physician told me once. One of my professors up in when I was going to a school to learn about lifestyle and that sort of a thing. He used the example of a particular supplement that was supposed to break up gallstones and and whatnot and be really good for the liver and the gallbladder. And this individual, somebody that he knew, one of his patients was taking this, and they said, "Oh, I had this, and I looked at my stool, and there was lots and lots of round green balls, and round little green spheres in my stool. So it must work. It must be true." Well, turns out that supplement was very high in magnesium. Now, magnesium, if you have a little bit of knowledge of science, magnesium is the chemical or the that is in chlorophyll that makes chlorophyll green. On top of that, magnesium is a green element. It's green. On top of that, these spheres were quite large. They were, I don't remember the exact size, but they were quite large. They were certainly way too large to have actually passed through the duct, which is very, very small, only a few millimeters in diameter. And so there was no way that these quite large spheres could have made it through. It just wouldn't have worked. There was no pain, there was nothing. Turns out that most likely what was happening was that the magnesium was simply going through and crystallizing into little round spheres. So it had nothing to do with the gallbladder at all, and everything to do with just basic chemistry and a simple knowledge of anatomy and physiology would explain that. And again, it has to do, the doctor knew because, well, you can't really have a couple millimeter duct passing a, nearly half an inch or however big they were, in the centimeter is, nearly a centimeter or so of sphere pass through. It just doesn't work that way. And something that's also really important, and this we've seen in fads that have taken place earlier than just the modern era, there is really a tendency to exploit a lack of scientific exploration on a subject. This we see, for example, in the opium fad that took place over 100 years ago. When opium and morphine were first discovered as painkillers, it was a huge thing. They'd never had this before. During the Civil War, it was used for the first time in a war context, and with amputees and things like that. It was incredible. It was a wonder drug, and so people started using it to treat everything. Physicians would prescribe it for things that it had no business being prescribed for. And as a direct result, you had people get addicted to morphine and opium for life, and it just created a whole society of little more than drug addicts. And this is something that is not a good thing. And this thing is because there wasn't enough scientific information and exploration at that time, people just started prescribing it for everything. Doctors would give it for this and that and the other. Now that we know better, we know that opioids are not really good for much else other than pain killing. There are maybe a couple other uses, but by and large, we don't use them for that because there are other more effective and less dangerous things to use for that, generally speaking. And this is where the cannabis fad falls. And again, we'll explain it, but generally speaking, with cannabis especially, and there are other fads like this, and have been other fads like this throughout history. There is sometimes just a lack of scientific exploration in a subject for various and sundry reasons. It may not be necessarily that. One fad I remember as well was the coconut oil fad. The idea, you add coconut oil to here and there and everywhere, and there you go. Well, we don't know what coconut oil does. Well, it's good for seizures. Well, we don't really know that. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but is it really? Nobody knows. There's just not been enough research on it. Does it behave the same way? It's more saturated than any animal fat. In fact, it's the most saturated fat on the planet. But, does it have the same effect as saturated animal fat? We don't know. Nobody knows. It's not exactly the same structure. There's just not enough research. And so, sometimes there is an exploitation of this lack of information on a subject. And doesn't necessarily mean that the thing is bad. It just means that most of the stuff that's claimed for it, unfortunately, can't really be claimed for it because there's no proof. And some people might say, but look at all the people it's helped. Well, again, plus getting better from something, that does happen. And so, I'm honestly sad to say that, there isn't a lot of, without a detailed double-blind study, we just can't know, and that's unfortunate. And hopefully, with these things that are coming in here soon, we'll be able to see that. And I do see you there, Susie, as well. I see your comments there. Let's see here. Now we'll take a look at a few fads here. We're going to look at 3 specifically. We're going to look at first the Atkins Diet. And so that's what we're going to look at here. This is the quintessential low-carb diet, and all low-carb diets have the same issues that this one does. All of them. All of them. And it's... Yeah, but the Atkins diet is the quintessential low-carb diet. It's the one that really kind of started the whole phase and really got the idea into the public's head that carbs are bad and protein is good. Now, protein, of course, has had a good rap for a long time, but this is where we really got the idea that carbs are bad for you. It claims that carbohydrates cause weight gain. However, carbohydrates are in fact the most fundamental source of energy that our bodies use. Our muscles burn carbohydrates before anything else. Our brain burns nothing but carbohydrates. It doesn't burn fat and it doesn't burn protein. So if you don't have carbohydrates, your brain isn't working properly. And so, again, with the lack of knowledge of anatomy and physiology, that really comes to the forefront here. On top of that, protein foods, which are extremely expensive compared to other foods, these are used in abundance, of course. Meats in particular are advocated for. Animal foods, high in protein, so meats and eggs. Flesh foods and eggs are highly recommended. Fish is, of course, up there, but that falls under flesh foods. So there's really a lot of, how shall I say it? It's really quite expensive to maintain a low-carb, high-protein diet for quite some time. And because of the kinds of foods that the Atkins Diet recommends, this diet is also usually high in fat and high in cholesterol. In fact, the whole thing with the Atkins Diet was that, you can eat as much fat as you want. You're never going to get, you aren't going to get fat. It's carbs that are the problem. Well, again, it's a lack of knowledge of basic anatomy and physiology, and in this case also a little basic chemistry. Fat is more than twice as calorie dense as either carbs or protein put together. It has 9 calories per gram, or 9 kilocalories per gram, as opposed to carbs and protein both each having 4 calories per gram. And so, yeah, it's fat is higher in energy, and so it's going to store more easily, and you're just going to have to store more. Now, fat's still essential. It's not evil, right? It's just too much of it is not good. Just like too much protein is a bad thing, and too much carbs can also be a bad thing. So, I'm not saying that carbs are all good either. It's a balance, temperance. Now, the thing with the Atkins diet and high-protein diets in general is that essentially they contain all the worst problems that the Western diet has, and they eliminate the few positives that this diet actually does have. And so it's really, really important that we stay away from this particular diet and all of its subsets. The low-carb diet is perhaps the single most insidious thing and myth and lie that has ever been perpetuated upon the world. Now, I will grant, processed carbohydrates are a terrible thing. Okay, I'm not talking about sugar, right? I'm not talking about processed sugar. I'm not talking about white flour. Those things are bad. Okay, those kinds of carbs are bad, but that's because they're processed. Whole potatoes, baked. I'm not talking about I'm not talking about French fries. Okay, baked potatoes without the sour cream and butter and that sort of a thing are actually quite good for you. As a matter of fact, they're really good for you. Sweet potatoes, yuca or cassava or tapioca, it's all the same thing. Those are great for you. Whole wheat, unless you have an allergy to wheat or you have celiac disease or some other reason why you cannot consume gluten or wheat. Whole wheat bread is not bad for you. There's a lot of myths perpetuated about that. Now, sometimes you may be sensitive to the pesticides, and so organic is going to be much better. I know that does exist as well. So that's also something to try. But, again, if you already are diagnosed with some pre-existing condition, then don't bother. Steer clear of it. And I do see your question there, Susie. Some people eat anything, they don't gain weight. Well, that's because of their metabolism. I happen to be one of those people. Okay, so confession time. I have a fast metabolism. A few years, it's slowed down a little bit, right? It's slowed down a little bit, but I remember I went on a 1-day water fast. So that's where you do nothing. You don't eat anything. You just drink water. That's it, and that's the only thing you drink is water. A water fast. 1 day, I lost 6 pounds. Okay, that's because at the time, and I don't know what it is now, I need to recalculate it, but my basal metabolic rate, so that's just by existing. If I was to lie down on a bed and do nothing but breathe and exist, okay, if I was to do nothing else, I would burn nearly 1,700 calories just by existing. I have a very fast metabolism, okay? So it's really, really important that you acknowledge that. Banana bread, wheat bread, all those things, those are good as long as it's whole. And yes, I am blessed. The problem is, at the same time, you do start slowing down and things like that. So it's important that you acknowledge, you look at where you are, and don't eat for more than your body can handle, right? Different people are different in different ways. And the issue isn't just about weight, because you look healthy on the outside doesn't mean you're healthy on the inside. Okay. So, bear that in mind as well. Now, I want to move to the alkaline diet. This is one that, especially in certain circles that I am a part of, I don't subscribe to this, but there are a number of people that I know in my own sphere of influence who do subscribe to this fad diet, the alkaline diet. This diet claims that the body must be alkaline in order to survive. Often they recommend a pH of 8.5 or higher. This is technically correct that, yes, our body should be slightly alkaline, but the pH range should not be anything higher than 7.45 or so. 7.35 to 7.45 is about the range that we should have. There's some parts of the body that should be more acidic, and there's some that should be more alkaline. And in fact, anything over 8 is actually anything 8 and above on the pH scale is lethal. So if you got your body to the pH that is good diet, that is, you will die. If you get your body to 8.0 pH, you will die. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. You will. So this diet is not it's not accurate. Just right off the bat, the premise of it is not good. Now, I will say that the kinds of foods that are typically recommended by this diet are generally quite good things. They're generally good. It generally recommends a whole food plant-based diet. That's not a bad thing. Okay, I'm all for a whole food plant-based diet. The science shows that. The evidence shows that. The Bible talks about it. There's just no way around it. That's the best way to go. It's the premise that's flawed. However, there are also some weird claims. For example, that acidic foods like citrus, pineapple, and vinegar, which is not a good thing to consume. I'm not talk about that now, but that's beside the point. But there's these claims that acidic foods will change the pH in your body to become alkaline. And that's not the way chemistry works. If you consume something acidic, you become acidic. That's just the way it works. And vinegar actually, especially so. But any kind of acid that you take in has the tendency to make your body more acidic. Now that's normal. In fact, there are very few foods that are actually alkaline in nature or alkalizing in nature. And actually 7.35 to 7.45 is pretty normal. That's the pH of water, which is nil. It's basically neutral. Okay, and so you don't really need, our body should really be pretty neutral. We don't really consume any foods that are actually alkaline in nature. We do consume a lot of foods that are acidic in nature, but our bodies also have acid that's way stronger than any of that contained in the stomach. And the stomach itself, in fact, the pH of the stomach is like 2. It's really acidic. I think the only thing more acidic than stomach acid is battery acid. It's really strong stuff. And our body, well, I mean, that goes into our intestines all the time. And what happens is our body has natural chemicals that it produces for itself to neutralize those acids, and and our body's pH is carefully regulated by our hormonal system. It's quite simple, and our kidneys especially are quite adept at that. So there's really no need to do the careful and extensive diet. Often this diet requires that you cut out food items unnecessarily. And sometimes important nutrients can be left out. If you're not careful, you don't know what you're doing. So if you believe, just be careful. Don't cut out food items that are not bad for you. Don't that you might need those nutrients for it. Now, if you already have the nutrients for that from something else, as long as you're eating a healthy, balanced, whole food plant-based diet, you're fine. Yeah. I will say, though, that this often also advocates for the use of expensive water filtering equipment. And that's just plain unnecessary. You don't need an expensive water filter that alkalizes your water. It's just not true. In fact, studies have now shown that it's not actually alkalizing the water. It's alkalizing the impurities in the water, and that those impurities can actually cause real harm. Now, of course, it is filtering out a lot of impurities, but if you're drinking pure water, then, well, you die. All the water that we drink needs to have some impurities in it, and by impurities I mean just stuff that isn't water, in order for us to actually survive, because water has a magnetic charge, or an electric charge rather, that would pull stuff out of our cells, and basically everything will go into our bloodstream and we would die. It's not a good thing. So, yes, that's poorly explained. But anyway, the water filtering equipment is not necessary. It's not. It's expensive. And the last one we're going to be looking at is the Cannabis Fad. It's a decidedly powerful plant, and especially if it's been isolated and distilled into CBD oil or extract or anything else. Those are drugs. There is no difference between the distilled essence or extract of a cannabis plant or any other plant for that matter and a drug medication. There's no difference. They're both extensively processed. And usually the tinctures that you get in stores or the extracts that you get in stores are heavily processed, even from natural food stores. So it's better if you're going to do tinctures, which again, I don't really recommend them for general use, but if you do use them, make them yourself. It's just way easier to do that, or well, way better to do that because you know what goes in it. It's much stronger usually, and it's also much more effective. So, yeah. And also, you know exactly what goes in it and the process and so on. So it's really better. Usually, proponents of cannabis will claim a wide range of often completely unrelated benefits. Now, that's not necessarily wrong, because there are a number of, well, I mean, for example, chamomile. I reference it all the time. I mean, who knew that it would be very useful for the digestion and for anxiety and for the liver and for wounds? You know, like, goodness gracious. You know, you wouldn't think so. So there could be a lot of benefits for cannabis, but the problem is that essentially, when you boil it down to it, they're really claiming that cannabis is a cure-all, a panacea, and this is just not something that's effective. Doesn't do. And unfortunately, and I cannot help but draw the parallel once again to opium. Opium was really the same thing. There was this massive surge of popularity of opium because, well, I mean, it made you feel good, and on top of that, it took pain away. That's huge. That's amazing. So of course you're going to feel better. And, you know, you think it's cured you, but you have to keep taking it and keep taking it and keep taking it, because you get, if not psychologically addicted to it, you get physiologically addicted to it, and that's a problem. You can't just get off that stuff. It's not easy to get off of, and you need real medical supervision for it. So, you know, it's hard, and on top of that, it's hard to get off of. Even if you're, you know, especially if you're psychologically as well as physiologically addicted to it. Now, cannabis may or may not have that same benefit, right? Or that same, not benefit, that same issue. Cannabis may or may not have that issue. I don't know. Yes, chamomile. I did mention chamomile there, Susie. I do see. Yes. Cannabis, just there's not enough studies on it. There's not enough evidence to know what it does and doesn't do. And so it's really not a good idea to go around and say, oh, well, it does this and that and the other. There's not enough evidence for it. And we don't know its safety, of the safety of its isolates. We don't know. And on top of that, we don't even know what, you know, I remember I was talking to an individual who's a big advocate for cannabis. And once again, I'm not against it. Right, I'm not against it necessarily completely. Like, recreational use, yes, absolutely, no question about that. You should not be using this recreationally, just flat out no. But it does have powerful effects, and so it does have, therefore, powerful potential uses. And I remember this individual was speaking to me, who was a big proponent of this, and he was saying, oh, well, they've discovered a cannabinoid system in the brain, so therefore we need to use cannabis. And of course, we also have an opioid system in the brain, but that doesn't mean we need to be constantly consuming opium. Instead, we have natural things that we do that release those opioids in our naturally occurring opioids, naturally produced opioids by our own body. We have things that we do that create those and that sate those needs naturally. And if we have a cannabinoid system in our brain, then we are also going to have things that we do that produce those cannabinoids naturally. Now, what those are, no idea. We don't know. There's just not been enough research yet because cannabis has so recently been a controlled substance on a state and federal level. And so it's really important that we begin to start looking at this. And because cannabis is powerful, it's not a mild remedy. And on top of the fact that we just don't have enough evidence of what it does, it really should be more of a last resort than an immediate go-to. Yeah. Now, again, it could be beneficial for some things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against it completely when in use for, medical and natural remedies. I just, I don't trust it because it's powerful. And my philosophy is use that which causes the least potential harm and does the most good. And so you use the simplest and the easiest and the least harmful first. And you go up from there to the most potentially harmful, right, along the way. Now, where is cannabis on that level? Nobody knows. There's just not been enough studies on it. There just have not been enough studies on it. Now we're down to the last couple slides here, so we're almost done here. How can we tell if something is a fad? How? Well, here are just 5 points that are really, really simple. First of all, it's probably a fad if it's expensive, if it's rare, or if it sounds exotic. There's a tendency in humanity to, for us people, especially as Westerners, to think, oh, hey, this is exotic. It sounds exotic, so it must be good for you. Well, at least in our culture, we have this. No, just it's not. If it's expensive, if it's rare, or if it's exotic sounding, it's probably a fad, especially if it's really capitalizing on those features. Oh, this is a rare plant or a rare thing, or oh, this thing from this far off country or this far off region of the world. That's probably a fad. If it dismisses comprehensive scientific research or discourages personal research, that's two ends of a spectrum there. If it does either one of those things, it's probably a fad. And this is something that applies not only to, and fads, by the way, I want to say this now, fads can not only apply to natural health and natural remedies, there are also fads that do occur in physicians, with regular physicians and things like that. There are drugs that become very popular from time to time that we use over and over again. Or I say we as if I'm one of those. But there are drugs that gain popularity and lose popularity. They become, and there's reasons for that. But they become really popular with physicians really quickly, and then they lose that popularity almost as fast as they gained it. So fads can also happen in the medical establishment as well as with the natural health. So. And there are some people out there who say, oh, well, don't worry about doing it for yourself. Just look at... No, that's not true either, right? You need to research things for yourself, but don't dismiss comprehensive scientific research. There's no reason to. If there are 350 studies that say something is not bad for you, and 2 studies that say that it's bad for you, well, or that it's good for you, then, well, you're probably going to... Or no. I got that wrong. If there's like 350 studies that say something is not bad for you, and 2 studies that say that it's bad, get and dismiss the small studies just because the big studies aren't there, or just because the preponderance of evidence is for that either. You don't want to do that, but you also want to be wise. A classic case is the whole idea of vaccines, anti-vax. There are quite literally thousands of studies that disprove the connection between vaccines and autism, for example. There have been so many studies that there have been, dozens of meta-studies. There's just been so much. And I have to say the link between autism and vaccines has been disproved more conclusively than the link between tobacco and cancer has been proved. There's just been so much research on that. And so it's really important to remember that, even though there are studies that do show in their numbers that vaccines cause autism. But those studies are not necessarily right, okay? There is a lot less of them, for one thing. And on top of that, there's there's a lot of evidence that autism actually happens before you're born, so it can't be caused. And on top of that, autism existed before vaccines anyway, so it can't autism cannot be caused by vaccines because it existed before vaccines existed. And yes, common sense is absolutely right. We need wisdom from on high. We need common sense. Um, so, if it dismisses comprehensive scientific research or if it discourages personal research, it's a fad, most likely. If it's complicated, if as a supplement, for example, it has a list of more than 5 ingredients, or if it's something that's very difficult to do, not necessarily, now if you have personal reasons like, this was really hard for me to give up this particular thing, or this was really hard for me to, I couldn't quite figure out how to do this, that's different. But if it was man, this has a lot of involved steps, or if it's really, really just, it's difficult, objectively difficult, then it's probably a fad. And again, supplements, if it has more than 5 ingredients, it's almost certainly a fad and absolutely not a good idea to put in your body. Not necessarily, try one thing at a time, Another big thing, if it makes fantastic claims that are difficult or impossible to prove, then it's a fad. If it's unprovable, then, well, it's a fad. And if it wants you to buy lots of supplements or lots of other products, it's a fad. If it wants you to buy a bunch of stuff and buy this and buy that and get this piece of equipment and that bit of supplement and that number of supplements and things like that, it's a fad. It's not a fact. It's not essential for your health. Why? Well, here's why. Health is not expensive. And it does not come from rare or exotic foods or herbs. Health is not something that can be bought with money. Okay. So the reason, right, that a fad is something that's expensive, that sounds rare or sounds exotic, health is because real health does not cost that much money. It doesn't come from something rare. It doesn't come from something exotic. Right? The reason that we should not, or that a fad will often dismiss scientific research or say, oh, you don't need to research at all, the reason that that's a fad is because truth and something, and facts are truth. Truth will always come out, even in the most unfavorable circumstances for truth to come out. Truth will always come out in the end. And by and large, you will see that when it comes to studies, 1 study, 2 studies, 10 studies, 20 studies, even 50 or 60 studies, can show something to be bad for you, while you can have 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, 500,000 different studies that show that it's good for you, right? So if you have thousands upon studies, the thousands, right, are where the truth is coming out. The thousands are where the truth is coming out. Not the 60 or 70. Now, that's not always the case spiritually. That's a totally different thing, right? But truth, when you look at things objectively, will always come out on top. Even when the people who are doing the study don't want truth to come out, the truth will still come out. The reason that a fad, that something is a fad, if it's complex, if it involves a bunch of ingredients and things like that, because health is always simple. Sometimes a natural remedy or applying a principle may involve some work, but it's not complicated. A natural remedy, how complicated is it to make herbal tea? Not complicated. You need all of 2 ingredients, the herb and hot water. That's it, right? It's really important that we remember that health is always simple. Even if there's some work involved, and sometimes hard work, that doesn't mean that it's complicated. It just means it's hard work. the reason that a fad is something that's unprovable or that makes difficult to prove or impossible to prove claims is because health is always produced by reasonable actions. It doesn't make fantastic claims. Now, sometimes phenomenal things do happen. Don't get me wrong, but fantastic claims. Health doesn't make fantastic, really, ridiculous claims. Health is reasonable. And because health is a part of truth, it's always provable, because truth is provable. And this is something that I want to reiterate over and over. I cannot iterate this enough. I can't say this enough. Supplements, shake mixes, and the like can never produce health. Expensive products like certain water filters that alkalize your water, expensive foods that you have to buy, expensive shake mixes or protein mixes, expensive supplements, they never produce health. Health does not come from those things. If they came from those things, the Bible would say so, but health does not come from those things. Health ultimately always comes from a healthy lifestyle. That's where health comes from. Health comes always from a healthy lifestyle. That's where it comes from. There's no other place that health can come from. Watching via the live stream. Hey, now's your time to ask the questions. You can go ahead and leave your questions in the chat, and I will see them and answer them as best as I am able. If you are watching via the Zoom, if you're joining us via the Zoom, then you can go ahead and ask your questions freely now verbally, and I'll do my best to answer them. So go ahead and ask your questions. Okay, I'm seeing a question about of that particular folk remedy. It doesn't mean that it's wrong or bad. I've just never heard of it. I don't know. I've never seen that. I've never heard of it. Earache. One remedy I do know for earaches that's supposed to work is you take an onion and you attach it to your ear, and it's supposed to draw out whatever's going on. But it depends on what causes the earache in the first place, right? If it's an infection, the onion will probably help. Olive oil may have something to do with, if it may have some antibiotic properties or and so on, or antifungal properties. But I would be cautious of putting oil in your ear. That's why, for example, eardrops are very quickly evaporating usually. And so they just kind of leave their residue in the ear, so that, or at least it quickly drains away. I don't know. It's not necessarily. I don't know. I've never seen that or heard of that before. So, unfortunately, I can't give you any more information on that. But again, it depends on the cause of the earache. Again, if it's something like an infection, then of course you're going to be looking at something that's, you're going to be looking at antibiotics. You're going to be looking at herbs like garlic would be very useful to use internally, and having an onion stuck to your ear would also be a very useful remedy to draw out any infection that's there. But once again, I don't know. I don't know. I've never heard of that, so I can't speak more freely on that. Are there any other questions? Okay. Alrighty then. I'm not seeing any further questions, and it is already 8:06, so I think we're going to go ahead and end things here. Once again, if you have any questions, I do want to say, if you have any questions or you want to talk about anything herbal or natural remedies of any sort, feel free to contact me. Again, I am the King's Bard. You can find me on Facebook and on YouTube. You can contact me at either of those places. Although Facebook, my Facebook page, The King's Bard, you can contact me there. more effectively. So, and if yeah, so if you have any questions, and of course, if you're on YouTube, you can always just leave a comment down below, and I will do my best to answer that when I see them. So anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Let's go ahead and close out with a word of prayer, and I will see you guys on Saturday. Oh, whoops. Sorry, we have one more question. Let's get that question. I do want to take this time, actually, while I'm waiting for the question, to say that if you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so. If you're on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so that you can get notifications. I will be putting out video this week. Yeah, I can't hear you, Susie. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. Let me try something here. Okay, try and unmute. No, I still can't hear you. I don't know what's going on. Go ahead and type it in chat. I'm sorry. If you've been saying things this whole time, I didn't know. I couldn't hear you. I'm terribly sorry. I don't know why I can't hear you. That's very strange. This is very odd. Okay. Actually, you would not be cooking the garlic. No, the garlic would be raw. Raw garlic is the best way to have garlic. That's just... let's see here. I think I know what the problem is. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Let's see. Let's do that one. Okay. There we go. There we go. Now I should be able to hear you. Hey, there we go. Yeah, that's the problem. There was something wrong with the headset.
After just chew it up and swallow it, and then the onion, you say get a little piece and just stick it in your ear, but not all the way.
Onion, and you would put it over your ear.
Maybe around the earlobe, the outside of it.
Something like that. It would look kind of like this headset here, where it's just kind of over your ear.
Go.
Yeah.
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 And then just chew the garlic fresh, like one little head.
Yeah. If you can stand to chew it, then yeah, absolutely. Or just swallow it whole. It's a
little spicy, but I can handle it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. Then do that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. But again, it depends. Like I said, it depends on the cause of the earache. So. Alrighty. Well, let's go ahead and close out. I apologize for that. I didn't know that. Yeah, that you were speaking. I apologize for that. Anyway. Okay. Alrighty. Well, we're gonna go ahead and close out. And we can. I'll end the stream after that. Okay. So that being said, let's go ahead and close out. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys this upcoming Saturday on Sabbath. So let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your grace, for your mercy, for your infinite love, and your wonderful kindness. Thank you so much once again for everything that you do. And I just ask, Lord, that you would please be with us now and keep us as we go our separate ways. Fill us with your Spirit. And Lord, I ask that you would give us wisdom to know how to apply the things that we've learned here today, this evening, and that we would also be able to come closer and closer and closer to you. Thank you so much again for everything that you do. Please bring us closer to Jesus. In His name we pray and ask these. Hit that, if you're on YouTube, like the videos, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. And if you are on Facebook, not only like the video and share it, but also like the page as well, The King's Bard. So thank you very much.